Welcome back. One of the biggest things that you run into when you're a business owner or starting a business is knowing when to get a lawyer involved and when not to. Getting a lawyer involved at the wrong time can be very expensive and can really slow things down. And there's a lot of things that you can do on your own. On the other side of that equation, getting a lawyer involved when it's too late or not getting them involved at all can also be very expensive and can really slow things down. So knowing when to get a lawyer involved is going to be really important. It's a critical skill for business managers and business owners, and we're going to touch on that in this lecture. The first thing that you should be doing is identifying issues where attorneys should get involved, and there's a number of them, and I'm going to go through a list of them here. This isn't designed to be all-inclusive, but it will cover most of the most common times when you're going to run into needing to get an attorney involved. The first one on my list is franchise agreements. We're going to talk about franchising in a subsequent lecture, but having a franchise agreement is a very complex, it's a very complex document, and it obligates you to a significant number of both limitations and responsibilities. And so having an attorney take a look at that objectively and let you know what issues you're facing is pretty important. Loan terms. Anytime you get a bundle of papers from anybody with a lot of small print, that's probably a time when you should raise your hand and get an attorney involved to at least let you know if there's an issue to discuss or not. If you're going to be entering into a loan, and you'll see a common theme here is each of the things that I'm going to talk about tends to go over a long period of time and tends to be big dollars. And so if it goes over a long period of time and is big dollars and has a contract attached to it, you're likely going to want to get an attorney involved, and loan terms are one of them. So knowing whether you've got obligations that survive the closing of the loan, whether there's a personal guarantee, whether there's covenants to follow, whether you make warranties or representations, those are all going to be in your loan, and you're going to want an attorney to review those. If you're entering into a lease for a building or for land or for equipment that again is of size, and I'll qualify of size as being probably more than $5,000 to $10,000 or over an extended period of time, you're going to want to have an attorney review those leases to make sure that you haven't obligated yourself to something that's other than what you intended. If you're licensing intellectual property, whether that's you licensing it to someone else to utilize or whether you're licensing it from someone else, and again, it's a large dollar amount, if you're licensing it to yourself or if you're licensing it for your use, you're going to want to have an attorney review the end user license agreement and any other associated documents. If you're a tech company or you are focusing on intangible property, licensing your intangible property being probably a key to your business, you're going to want to have an attorney involved to develop your license and user license agreement and supporting documentation. One of the best ways to save money when starting a business or when operating one is to have an attorney prepare a library of standardized forms. Those could be non-disclosure agreements, standard sales contracts, employment agreements, and have those available for your use. And once you've gone through them once with the attorney, as long as there's no material changes, they're good to go. And so you can spend a little bit of money up front to get that forms library built, and then you're able to use them over and over and over again. And we'll talk a little bit about the annual checkup to make sure that those forms are still in line. But on balance, you're going to save yourself a lot of money by spending that up front, getting the forms library built. If you're going to buy or sell a business, you're going to want to have an attorney involved. There's generally a lot of moving parts. There's going to be the financing. There's going to be what are you buying? How are you buying it? What obligations are you assuming and what obligations are you not? And so each one of those elements is going to be a critical component to the process, and you're going to want to make sure that you have an attorney involved to help you identify those issues. The last on this list is non-standard contracts. So if you get a contract that is not your usual contract, you get a significant number of changes to your standardized form from someone else, or you run into a situation where you've got someone, again, on a large or lengthy contract is sending you a custom contract, non-standard contract, you're going to want to have an attorney look at that to determine whether you've got any obligations that are unintended. There's a few times when you need to have attorneys involved and when you should, and one of those is when you've got a major government regulatory violation. There's a number of these. You get a notice that says you owe $700 in sales tax that you forgot to remit, or that you have a minor code violation and you've got a $200 fine to pay. Don't need to get an attorney involved there. But what you probably do need to get an attorney involved is when you've got a major regulatory violation, where, for instance, you've been accused or you've accidentally spilled a significant amount of environmentally toxic substances into the groundwater, or something similar where the exposure, again, is north of $5,000 to $10,000 and or may cause jail time if it doesn't go well. Those violations you're going to want to get an attorney involved, particularly an attorney who's specialized in those violations, to be able to help navigate that for you. The other one is if you get sued, or you want to sue somebody, you're going to need an attorney, particularly if you've got an entity that is limited liability in nature, because in most cases they require an attorney admitted to the local bar to be able to prosecute a lawsuit on your behalf or defend a lawsuit on your behalf, so you can't represent yourself. If you run into major tax issues, whether that's income tax, whether that's sales tax, those are going to be times when you're going to want to get an attorney involved if it gets up into the high 4, low 5 figure range, or if there's a threat of criminal sanction. Anytime you bring new investors on, you're going to want to have an attorney help you navigate what the nature of their investment is, the documentation around their investment, and help setting the expectations appropriately. Additionally, you may have securities laws that you need to abide by, and the attorney will be able to help you identify what those laws are and how best to accomplish your investment goal. If you begin to conduct business in new jurisdictions, you're going to want to make sure that you at least understand what the laws are pertaining to your business in that jurisdiction, and potentially engage an attorney to make sure that you're set up right. You may need to register as a foreign business, and foreign meaning you're not registered in that state. You may have employees in that state, and I can tell you that each state is very different as far as employment laws. The employment laws in Florida are very different than the employment laws in California, and you're going to want to know what those differences are so you can abide by them. And you may have other registration, licensing, and reporting requirements that are unique to that state or jurisdiction, and so an attorney familiar with that state or jurisdiction may be able to help you. If your business goes bad and you end up having to file for bankruptcy or for receivership, which is a state-level form of similar to bankruptcy, you're going to want to have an attorney help navigate that for you, including understanding what personal liabilities you may have as a business owner or as an officer or director. If there is a transition, whether that's a transition because of retirement or death or sale of a partner or principal in a business, an attorney will be necessary to help both sides understand what their remaining obligations, duties, responsibilities, and rights are as it pertains to that transition event. And also, and we'll have a second set of lectures on the topic, but entity selection. So whether you're a sole proprietorship, partnership, limited liability company, corporation, etc., picking which one of those to be or to file as, you're going to want to have an attorney advise you based upon your current situation, the liability you expect to incur, the complexity of your business, and your local jurisdiction, which one of those you want to select. There's a number of things that you can conduct on your own that are usual do-it-yourself. The formation filings, the actual filling out of the forms and filing it with the Secretary of State's office, with the local county clerk, those can generally be done on your own. It's a ministerial task. It's relatively straightforward. And the website and the folks in the office at the agency will normally be very helpful in helping you navigate those forms. If you've got basic governmental reporting for taxes, so your sales tax reporting, your income tax reporting, your if you have inventory reporting, personal sale or personal property tax, those are all filings that you can make on your own or in conjunction with your accountant. You generally don't need an attorney to do those for you. If you're a limited liability company or you're registered with the state, you generally have an annual report which requires you to pay a fee and report any changes of officers, directors, etc. Those annual reports are relatively straightforward and easy to file. You normally don't need an attorney to file those. Basic contract review. If you have a basic contract and that contract is a simple, straightforward contract, it's your standard contract form, for instance, or it's a contract coming in from somebody else that's either of low value or looks like a standard industry contract or looks similar to your own, you're going to be able to review that without the need to have an attorney review it side by side with you. You may want to start off having an attorney review some of these with you so that you get to understand what the issues that they're looking for are. But after a while, you'll find that you're going to be able to spot most of those issues on your own, navigate and negotiate those. And then only for those non-standard contracts that I mentioned previously, where you really need to engage an attorney in contract review. There's going to be low risk and low cost areas, for instance, a purchase of office supplies, where you don't have a significant contract risk, you don't have a significant delivery risk or liability associated with it. And getting an attorney involved in those negotiations or contract review would be a waste of time and money. So if it's low risk and it's low cost and there's low exposure to you and your business, you are going to be able to do it yourself. The trick is recognizing some triggers around low cost and low risk. And you're going to know that from instinct. If it doesn't feel right, if it doesn't act right, if it doesn't look right, it's probably best to, at that point, at least get your attorney involved and have them help you. One of the things that I've recommended both as an attorney and when I've been inside an organization is to do an annual checkup with your legal team, your inside legal team and outside legal team. A lot of times if you're a small business, you are the inside legal team. There's no in-house counsel. But conducting this annual checkup is going to be a good opportunity for you to save a bunch of money by spending a few hours up front making sure everything's still in good shape. Just like your physical checkup, you're going to do a basic review of everything that you've got legally. So you're going to want to review your basic documentations, your forms library, everything that you've got from formation perspective, and let the attorneys know if there's been any real changes. They should also be letting you know if there's been any changes in the law that requires any updates to that forms library. The next thing you're going to want to review is employment agreements. You may have entered into new employment agreements. You may have terminated employees that were under employment agreements. The laws around employment agreements for that state may have changed. And so you're going to want to review the employment agreements currently in place, as well as any that have come on board or terminated to assess whether there's any changes that need to be made or whether there's any exposure that the company needs to cover off on. If you've entered into any new leases, or you've got a lease coming up on expiration, you're going to want to have the attorneys review and quickly check off on the leases to make sure that you've literally dotted all the I's and crossed every T. They're going to be able to identify for you any obligations that you've got, any notices that you have coming up that you may need to provide ahead of lease expiration, and what your obligations may be following lease expiration or on lease renewal. You're going to want the attorneys to review your insurance policies. So each time you enter into insurance, and there's a separate section where we're going to talk about insurance, you're going to get a declarations page that's essentially going to be, here's my base coverages and here's what this particular insurance policy will protect me for. And the attorneys are going to want to review that insurance to identify if you've left any holes out in your coverage that either need to be contracted so that you protect yourself, or that they may recommend that you go get additional insurance or have additional coverages. So just taking a quick look at your insurance declarations pages, your renewals, and your policies will allow an attorney to be able to identify any risks that may not be covered by that insurance that they may then want to adjust your basic documentation to reflect. As we had mentioned, your standardized contracts are going to be the way that you're conducting business on a regular basis. So in addition to your forms library, an extra review of those standardized purchase and sale agreements or other contracts that you use on a day-to-day basis in your business is going to be pretty important. The attorneys, as I just mentioned, may be wanting to change those contracts to protect you from additional risks that have been identified as part of your business review. So from that perspective, any review of your standardized contract should be included in the annual checkup. And if you're seeing a lot of changes in your standardized contract requested by clients, you should also bring that to the attention of the attorney so that they can either make changes to the standardized contract or advise you as to whether those changes are recommended or not and why. You're going to want the attorneys to take a quick look through your handbooks and procedures documents. Normally you'll have an employee handbook. You may have other procedures that govern your intellectual property, your IT systems, and those handbooks are going to be influenced both by how you do business as well as the law around it. And they oftentimes will protect you from frivolous lawsuits and or risk exposure to ensure that your business stays legally and physically safe. And so a review of those handbooks is important. If the laws change, for instance, as it pertains to employment in your state, you're going to want to update those sections of the employee handbook. If you've got different changes around a procedure, because there's been for instance, in California, they passed a law around protection of personal information online, you're going to want to make sure your procedures reflect, if you're doing business in California, that you adhere to the CCPA. And then you're going to want them to review your retirement plans. If you've got a 401k, an ERISA-backed plan, a SEP IRA, or any other retirement plans that are sponsored by your business, you're going to want them to review the retirement plans and make sure that you're adhering to all the requirements associated with those retirement plans and that all the documentation is up to snuff. And if you've changed out any trustees, that's reflected as well. The annual checkup shouldn't just be you handing stuff over to the attorneys. The attorneys should also be providing you with a legal environment update. Essentially, what have they seen in the state that you're operating in or in business as a whole that might be impacting your business now or down the road? Their job is to anticipate what's going to happen and be able to help protect you from any negative consequences of those changes in the legal environment. So this should be a good opportunity for them to get you up to speed as to what's going on in the law and what they expect may be coming down the road in the law, both either from the state legislature or local government, and what might be happening in the courts. If you've had any material transactions, you're going to also want to disclose those with the attorney and talk through them. They should have been involved in those transactions, buy-sell transactions, major property transactions. They should have been involved in that, as we talked about previously. But if they weren't, you're going to want to review those with them and make sure that they have been documented appropriately, and if there was any resolutions or other required actions that the organization take from a governance perspective, that those were handled properly. If there's structural changes in how your business operates, so you gain or lose a director, for instance, or you have a change in legal entity, or you add a subsidiary, or you have any one of a myriad of issues around the governing structure of your business, you're going to want to make sure that that's reviewed as part of your annual checkup, and if there's any documentation that needs to be done, that it's done at that time. Tax planning is also an important time to be able to, or the annual checkup is an important time to also do your tax planning. There may be changes in the tax law that your attorney should be aware of, and you can have that discussion at that point. There may be issues around how you're planning for your retirement, or changes in how you structure the organization to better plan for tax. That can all be discussed at that time. And in many cases, you would also have your outside accountant or CPA involved in these discussions. Annual filings, as I had mentioned, can be done yourself, but the annual checkup is generally a good time to check the box, and as a reminder to have those annual filings done and reviewed at that time so that the attorneys go, yep, it was done. Also, if you're a corporation, you may have a requirement in your state to conduct annual meetings, and so the annual checkup can be a good set of triggers to make sure that you have your annual meeting of shareholders in conjunction with the annual checkup. You're not going to want to put the minutes of the annual, you're not going to want to put the annual checkup in the minutes of the meeting, but it may be that you hold the annual meeting simultaneous with your annual legal checkup in a closely held corporation. The other thing you're going to want to review with the attorneys is any threatened or pending litigation. Again, if you're in litigation, they should know. And if you have had people threaten to sue you, or they've issued a demand letter but haven't filed yet, and it's pending litigation, you're going to want to disclose that with your attorney and make sure that they're aware of what's coming. They may be able to help offset that or prepare you better for that going through the annual checkup. And then finally, any known risks that you've identified. So you entered into a new line of business and there's a risk associated with that line of business. You may have terminated an employee who was volatile, and you're not sure if they're going to sue or not. They haven't threatened litigation, but they may be volatile, and so you want to make sure that that's accounted for. You may be looking at an accident that has occurred. Again, no threatened or pending litigation, but it's a risk associated with it. Those are things where you're going to want to make sure that you disclose all those known risks. Essentially, any communication that you have with your attorney is going to be privileged. So it's not able to be discovered during a litigation process. So it's a good time, and we'll talk about this in the how do you choose your attorney section. It's a good time to kind of bare your business soul, so to speak, identify any known risks that you may have, suspected risks you may have, and let the attorney absorb that information and advise you as to how best manage those risks. The annual checkup is one of the most critical things you can do to save yourself money and prepare your business on an annual basis to weather any upcoming storms ahead and make sure you're ready to go in the legal environment in which you choose to operate.